Beautiful. Thank you. Would you please open up your Bibles to John's Gospel, chapter 12 is where we're finding ourselves today. If you're visiting with us, I hope that you've been greeted and I hope that you've been welcomed, and we are glad that you're visiting with us this morning. We have been in a sermon series since the beginning of the year, walking through John's Gospel verse by verse, nearly sometimes word by word even, as we are exploring and how to what that means and how to apply it to our lives. And today we are in John chapter 12, and today in John chapter 12, we study a beautiful act of Mary. She blesses the Lord. And before we begin, I just want to ask you that question. What does it mean to bless the Lord? If someone was to come up to you and be like, I've been reading in the Bible and it says, bless the Lord. What does that mean? How would you describe it? What would you say to them in that moment? In human terms, we get blessed from time to time. We say, man, that really blessed me. You ever said that? That was a blessing to me and my family. What do we mean when we say that? In essence, what we mean when we say that is, it moved my heart. It raised my spirits. It stirred my affection. That's what we mean when we say that. Let me give you an illustration of that this past week. In the mail, I got a beautiful card that was a blessing to me. It was a card from Mary Black. If you know her, she's a very faithful member of Burnside, but hasn't been here in a while just with COVID concerns and things. And in the card, she was just thanking me for posting the sermons online. And she was specifically thanking me for the sermon I preached in John chapter 11 on Lazarus, because her husband Charlie passed away, and I preached on John chapter 11 for Charlie's funeral. And she was just detailing how much she appreciated that. And that card that she wrote, that she took the time to write those things and remind me of those things and gave to me, those things were a blessing to me. It moved my heart. It stirred my affections. It lifted my spirit. It blessed me. In order to bless someone, I think it's a formulation of words or actions that expresses goodwill. That's how we bless one another. But when it comes to blessing the Lord, man, that really is mind-boggling and mind-blowing. And I worked through that a little bit this week specifically. How do we bless the Lord? Even the thought that God would be blessed by sinful me and imperfect you, that somehow that would stir his affections, that would lift his spirit, that would raise his and move his heart, that's amazing to me. But the Bible speaks in great detail about us blessing God. In the Old Testament specifically, it's mentioned over and over and over again. 1 Chronicles chapter 29, then David said to all the assembly, now bless the Lord your God. And all the assembly blessed the Lord, the God of their fathers, and they bowed low and they did homage to the Lord and the King. In Psalm, repeated time and time again, is the command to bless the Lord. And in Psalm chapter 103, verse 1, it's where we get the lyrics for the song we're going to sing at our decision time. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. And when we say that, when we do that, what we're saying is that you and I, that we can stir God's affection, raise his spirit, touch and move his heart. The title of this morning's sermon is How to Bless the Lord. And what we're getting ready to study in John chapter 12 is just one example of how God is blessed through the actions of another. And what I want to do is study these verses in detail and learn from them and apply them. But don't think for a minute that this is an exhaustive case of how God is blessed. Okay? This is one example of many in the Bible. But this, in my opinion, is the most beautiful example. Let's read these verses, John chapter 12. Follow along, verses 1 through 8. Jesus, therefore, 6 days before the Passover, came again to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they made Jesus a supper there, and Martha was serving, but Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table with him. Mary then took a pound of very costly perfume of pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, who was intending to betray Jesus, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor people?" Now he said this not because he gave a lick about poor people, but because why? What does it say? Because he was a thief, and when he had the money box, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Therefore, Jesus said, "Leave her be, leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For you will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me." And I love that story, how beautiful it is. Mary takes something of great value and she lays it before the feet of Jesus. She blesses him with it. And it's such an amazingly tender moment. And I want to spend some time unpacking those verses and making some application from them. How to bless the Lord? 4 ways. Here's the first. Do it when the moment is urgent. Now, as I was reading this point, I was trying to wrestle with what to put on the end of that, and I settled on do it when the moment is urgent. I was going to say do it when the moment is right, do it when the need is great, but that's what I settled on, was do it when the moment is urgent, and I think you'll see why when we go back to verse 1. Jesus, therefore, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. At the moment that John chapter 12 opens up, do you realize where we are at in Jesus' ministry? The first 11 chapters details the first almost 3 years of Jesus' ministry. The last half of the Gospel of John, chapters 12 through 21, will zoom in and spend the entire rest of the Gospel on the last week that Jesus is alive. When it says there in verse 1 that it was 6 days before the Passover, they've celebrated the Passover 2 other times with Jesus, but this Passover was to be special because this was the last Passover that Jesus would spend with his disciples. Tomorrow is the triumphal entry, and next Friday, Jesus will be hanging on a cross and dying for the sins of the world. Time is urgent. It's precious. It's running out. And Mary somehow senses this, perhaps. And it's during this moment that the sister of Lazarus is taking the opportunity to bless the Lord. And what freedom and what liberation is born out of blessing the Lord when the time is urgent, when the time is ripe, when it's necessary. Because when we do that, when we bless the Lord at just the right time, when it's urgent, when it's needed the most, here's 2 things that are going to happen as a result of that. You're going to have no regrets. No regrets. Have you ever wished you would have done something that you didn't? You ever wished that you would have done something that you didn't? And time passed and it just didn't happen. As I was writing this point, it reminded me of this guy right here. Do you know who that is? It reminded me of Oskar Schindler. And yes, I spelled his name right. I looked it up. Oskar Schindler was a unique individual. He was a good man. I don't know if he was a saved man, but he was a good man. And Oskar Schindler, his life, they even detailed a movie concerning some of the greatest events that he did. But Oskar Schindler was a successful and wealthy businessman who lived in Germany during World War II, at the time when Hitler was at the height of exterminating Jews. And all of the Jews who Hitler deemed worthless were to be killed. This included the handicapped, this included the elderly, this included those who were trained in things that didn't advance the German Empire. And Oskar Schindler, he employed Jews to work in his factory, giving those who Hitler deemed as worthless a purpose and therefore an importance to keep them alive. His factory became a safe haven for Jews, and any Jew who would work for Oskar Schindler would be treated fairly, and his life would be spared because he was deemed an essential worker. Sometimes Oskar would have to bribe certain German officials with expensive gifts in order to allow those Jews who were worthless to come and work in his factory. And in the movie Schindler's List, at the end of it, as the Allies are coming to liberate the Jews, Oskar has some deep regrets. He looks around as he is getting ready to flee because he himself is going to be tried as a war criminal for his part in that, even though he was not a criminal in that sense. But he looks around as he's getting ready to get into his car, and he weeps as he's surrounded by the Jews who are there to wish him farewell. And he declares, I could have gotten more out. I could have saved more Jews. If only I would have sold my car. Maybe they would have given me 4 or 5 more. If I would have sold my watch, that would have given me 1 more. And it was a touching scene in the movie, but it was also a sad scene at the same time, because Oskar realized he had some regrets. He should have done something when the time was urgent. I have my own regrets. Maybe you do too. And I'm not talking about things in life that don't matter. What I'm talking about is blessing the Lord by blessing others, through serving them, through words of encouragement to them. I have my own regrets when it comes to words that I wish I would have said to people who are no longer here, just to encourage them and let them know how much of a blessing they've been to me. Maybe you have some of those same regrets. One in particular was my 5th and 6th grade Sunday school teacher in Alma, Michigan, at the church I attended. And at the time, when you're in the 5th and 6th grade, you don't truly appreciate the people in your life, right? At least I didn't. And I can remember Mary Huffine. She was a widowed Sunday school teacher who was a retired school teacher. And to a 5th and 6th grader, she seemed old and out of touch and a little bit strict. Loosen up, Mary, you know. But as I have gotten older and reflected back on her and my time in her, man, I appreciated that so much. Wish I would have written the letter to tell her how much she meant to me. Several years ago, I led some men from this church through a program called Letters from Dad. Anybody in here want to raise your hand if you went through that program, Letters from Dad? Man, it was a good time. The whole purpose of that program was to help men communicate their feelings in written form, in the form of letters to people that mattered to them. And during this program, we wrote 4 letters. Men were encouraged to write a letter to their spouse, 1 to their parents, 1 to each of their children, and 1 to be read upon their death. The whole purpose of it, I believe, was to help men not have regrets at the end of their life, to help communicate the things they wish and needed to say at the moment when it needed to be said. So how about you? Do you have some regrets? Do you have some desires that you wish you would have taken out and blessed other people and said the things that needed to be said? You can't change your past, but you can change your future. Write the letter, say the words, be generous, bless those around you while you have the opportunity to be a blessing. And in doing so, guess what? You're going to be a blessing to the Lord. For Mary, she had 0 regrets a week later. When Jesus was put to death on the cross, do you suppose Mary was like, man, I wish I would have spent more time in the kitchen with my sister Martha? I'm thinking that's not at all what was going through her head. I bet she was thankful that she blessed the Lord by giving this expensive perfume for the sake of Jesus. And so if you want to bless the Lord, do it when the moment is urgent. Find that funeral that is happening. Find that ministry that's struggling. Find a heart that is breaking. Find a place where Satan is opposing. And step into that spot and be an encouragement. Be a supporter. Be a blessing. That's going to bless the Lord. If you bless the Lord when the time is urgent, you're going to have no regrets. But listen, in order to do that, in order to step in when the moment is needed, you're going to also have to make no excuses. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of Mary just for a moment. There's a dinner that's happening, that's taking place. It's in the other room. It's where all the men are gathered. The atmosphere seems a little serious. The mood seems a little somber. Jesus seems focused. And she could have given all the excuses in the world as to why not go in there and open up this perfume and bless Jesus with it. I don't want to be a bother. I don't want to interrupt. I'll find some other time to do it. She was not an excuse maker. And she blessed the Lord when the time was, because she didn't have any excuses. She didn't make excuses. Let's not be excuse makers. Let's find a way to bless the Lord when the time is urgent, when it's needed most. Secondly, if you want to bless the Lord, give what is meaningful. Returning to our text, verses 2 and the first half of verse 3. So they made him, that's Jesus, a supper while he was there, and Martha was serving. That's what she's good at. That's her spiritual gift. But Lazarus was one of those who was reclining at the table with Jesus. Mary then took a pound of very costly perfume of pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. As I read those verses this past week, two questions I wanted to answer that came from those verses. The first question is this: what's nard? I'll be really honest with you. When I read that, there was two thoughts I had immediately that I knew weren't right, but it's what popped in my mind. The first was like, some sort of shortening, like lard, and I knew it wasn't lard, but I also thought, man, you don't want to put that on his feet, right? The second thing that I thought of was The Office. Andy Bernard, if you've never seen it, he's known as the Nard Dog. And now I want to see The Office. Okay, those are the two things that popped in my head, and I knew neither one of those were right. So this led me to do some study, and this is what I found. From Mark's account of these verses in Mark chapter 14 and Matthew chapter 26, we know that this nard was contained in an alabaster vial. One commentary I read said that this nard was an aromatic herb that was contained in that was grown in the high pasture land of the Himalayas between Tibet and India. And that this plant would be taken, it would be ground out, it'd be kind of wrung out, if you will, and an oil would be created from this. This is what we know. This nard was super, super expensive. Later on, Judas is going to complain about the waste of this, and he's going to say, we could have sold this for 300 denarii. You know how much 300 denarii is? A year's wage. Think about how much money you make in a year. And instead of buying food or paying your mortgage or paying for utilities, you bought perfume or cologne. It must have been real nice. That's what nard is. The second question that I had as I read those verses is, why did she have it? Why did Mary have it? Two possibilities. Perhaps, number one, she wanted to smell good. Mark Moore, in his Life of Christ commentary, says that this alabaster flask likely hung around a person's neck. It was made of translucent stone, which had been bored out in order to hold this costly perfume and then sealed back up. And in order to pour out the contents of the flask, you had to break the neck of the flask. He goes on to say, perfumes were especially important in a culture such as theirs, where water, hence baths, were scarce. They didn't have deodorant, yo. And in order to not be offensive to people you came around, it was important for you to cover up your own natural scent with another natural scent, nard. But there's a second possibility as to why she had this. Nard was used to make dead bodies smell better. They would also need fragrances to cover over the odor of dead, decaying bodies. Did you know that the word nard literally means myrrh? Did you know that? Where have we heard that before? We've heard that because it was a burial spice that the Magi first presented to Jesus when he was born. This was a burial spice. And why did Mary have a burial spice? Who did she just bury back in John chapter 11? Who was it? Lazarus. So maybe the reason that she had this was because she intended to bury her brother with it, and maybe even possibly use some of it to prepare Lazarus's body. And what is amazing is she's showing her gratitude and thanks to Jesus that she didn't need it after all for Lazarus. Lazarus is alive and well. He's sitting at the table with Jesus. He's enjoying a meal. And isn't it amazing that she takes this burial spice that she had just used a few days earlier on for her brother to prepare his body for? Now she's like, I didn't need this because of you, Jesus. Thank you. And she's pouring it at his feet. The point of it is this: if you want to bless the Lord, you give what is most meaningful to you. You sacrifice something that is of worth to you. I heard a preacher say this not too long ago, and I don't know if I fully agree with it. I guess there's some merit to it, but he posed the question that really caused me to think, and I'll pose it to you. Are you even worshiping if there's no sacrifice? If it didn't cost you something, are you even worshiping? And that was an interesting thought I had. Leads me to ask this question: are you willing to sacrifice for Jesus? And before you answer with big aspirations of wanting to give everything you have to Jesus, that he would use it, that he would be blessed by it, might I just remind you that most Christians show up to church 2 times a month. While we would sit here at the height of this emotional sermon that stirs our affections for Jesus, and we would say, I would commit anything he would ask me to give, the reality is, most of us have trouble committing to being gathered together in worship of him. And so what maybe you need to understand is that God is blessed when you show up. And how about committing to not missing even a single Sunday for just 6 months? See how that goes. Be a blessing to the Lord in that. How to bless the Lord: do it when the moment is urgent. Give what is most meaningful. Here's the third way to bless the Lord: do it where it impacts many. Look at the last half of verse 3. Mary then took a pound of very costly perfume of pure nard, anointed the feet of Jesus, wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Anybody in here like cologne or perfume? Do you like some? I know some of you guys have got some very strong reactions to strong odors, but I am a fan of cologne. I have several bottles of cologne that lines the shelf of my bathroom. And over the summer, I purchased a new bottle of cologne. Lindsay and I were with my parents. We went to Shipshewana, Indiana. If you don't know what Shipshewana is, it's where they have a huge flea market. And by huge, I mean they have 500 football fields worth of booths, all junk to buy. And one of the booths that I went to was a designer fragrance booth. And I'm not talking the knockoff, okay? I'm not talking like, a generic whatever. We're talking the real deal. And this guy had every scent imaginable. And he was quite a salesman too. He talked me into buying a bottle of cologne that I'd never heard of before, and I can't even really pronounce. And it wasn't cheap. And I'm not going to tell you how much it was, because there'd be some Judas in here. Why all that waste? But I will tell you, it was worth it. This cologne is different than many of the colognes that's sold in stores today. Many colognes that are sold in stores today are alcohol-based, which means that when you spray them on your skin, the alcohol evaporates rather quickly and the scent doesn't linger very long. This particular cologne that I purchased was oil-based, meaning that when you spray it, you don't want to put it on your clothing, you want to put it on your skin and rub it in. When you do that, the oil lingers longer and the smell lasts a little bit longer as well. But you know something? I can't imagine using the whole bottle of cologne at once. But Mary pours out the bottle of pure nard on Jesus' head and then his feet. And at the end of verse 3 it says, the house was filled with a fragrance of the perfume. You think? The point I'm trying to get across to you is this. What Mary did was a very public act. It wasn't a secret. There was no hiding it. People were going to know. And yet she didn't care. She was honoring Jesus in such a way that she didn't notice the people around her. And I'll be honest with you, I wish I had more of that in my life. Aren't we sometimes really concerned with what others think of us as we're in the midst of worship? You know, that's one of the reasons we stopped passing the offering plates in church, because we didn't want you to care about what other people saw you putting into the plate. We didn't want you to feel guilted into putting that into the, well, they're going to be looking at me if I don't put anything in the plate. And all too often we come together and we're worried about what other people think about our worship. And I wish I could be like Mary. She didn't care what other people thought. Her attentions, her affections were squarely and solely on Jesus. But two things that I think that I see when she does this, if you want to do and bless the Lord like Mary blessed the Lord, do it in humility. Mary takes a great position of humility. Two things I want you to notice from those verses about her humility. Did you notice that what's she doing with Jesus' feet with her hair? She's wiping his feet with her hair. Did you know in that culture, it was very disrespectful for a woman to let her hair down, except in the privacy of her own home with her husband? If she was in any sort of public setting, her hair had to be put up. Mary didn't care. This is what I'm doing for the Lord. It was a sign of humility. She's letting her hair down for Jesus, and she's wiping his feet with her hair. The second thing I want you to notice is her stance, her position, her posture. She was more than likely bowed, maybe kneeling, perhaps even prostrate, laying flat. She was humble. Humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. Second way, if you want to bless the Lord like Mary blessed the Lord, you need to do it with sincerity. Don't mistake what Mary did as fake flamboyance. What would happen if in the middle of a worship service, if Jesus was somehow here in the flesh, in person, and we saw this woman come up, and we saw this extravagant thing happen? How many of us would judge her and be like, oh, she's just doing that for show. Can't believe her. What she's doing here is not fake flamboyance. She was sincere of her worship of Jesus in this moment. I've said this a ton and I'll say it again. God isn't into fake. He doesn't want you to raise your hands in worship because everyone's watching you and you want to somehow impress them that you are some great worshiper, that you're really holy. He's not into fake. In fact, in Matthew chapter 6, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus clearly tells us what God thinks of fake Christians. Matthew chapter 6, verse 5. When you pray, don't be like the hypocrites. They love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on the street corners. Why? Why would they do that? Here's why. So they may be seen by men. They're trying to impress men. Look how holy I am. Look how righteous I am. Look how pious I am. Jesus says, truly I say to you, they've received their reward in full. What he's saying there, God's not blessed by that. They got exactly what they wanted in that moment. They got the praise of men. They may be talked about nicely and by men in privacy. That's their reward in full. Jesus wants you to do what you do with humility and sincerity. And what Mary is doing, this is about humility. It's not about the perfume. It's not about the cost of the perfume. It's public, it's in front of people, and it's with great humility, but with great sincerity. Now here's something that I want to point out to you as well, and I didn't quite know how to... There's a lot about this sermon I wasn't sure how to word, and this was one of those too. And I didn't know quite how to fill in the blank, but I settled on this. Your critics will object. That when you bless the Lord, and it's done with humility and it's done with sincerity, there's going to be people in your life who see what you're doing and they're going to object. Returning to our text, verses 4 through 6, but Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, who was intending to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor people?" Now he said this not because he was concerned about the poor, but because he was a thief. And as he had the money box, he used to pilfer what was put into it. Whenever you seek to bless the Lord, there will be no shortage of people who second guess your motives. Maybe this will help. I once heard James MacDonald give a general categorization of 4 types of people that are found in the world. 4 types of people, 4 types of categories. First of all, there's wise people. This is what we aspire to be. We seek to be wise. We want to be people who discern. And wise people yield to facts. What do I mean by that? I mean, they may think one way about something, but when they hear the truth, well, then they're capable of changing their mind about it. That's wise people. But then there's the opposite of that, and the Bible has a lot to say about foolish people. And Proverbs talks specifically a lot about foolish people. They don't yield to facts. You can explain to them, this is what it means, this is what the truth is, and don't waste your time trying to convince foolish people. I believe that foolish people are the category of people that Jesus told us, don't waste your time, don't cast your pearls before swine, because it won't change how they think about things. Here's the third type of people, wounded people. Something happened in their past that hurt them emotionally, maybe mentally, and where they would otherwise make good choices, a wounded person will make bad choices based on something that happened to them in their past. And finally, the last category, the category that I believe Judas falls into, evil people. There are evil people that exist. And these type of people are the most dangerous. They have one objective, that is, their goal is to take you out. They will lie about you. They will magnify your flaws publicly to anyone who will listen. And Judas was an evil critic. Everyone else was touched by the result of Mary's offering to Jesus, but not Judas. Judas speaks up with an opinion, with a judgment really. And he's like, look, you guys, I'm a big fan of Jesus. I like him just as much as you do, but that's a lot of perfume. That's a lot of expensive perfume. It's a waste. And his response on the surface seems so spiritually mature. We could sell it and we could have given the money to people who had need. I mean, who would have voted for that? That sounds reasonable, right? Judas used pseudo-hyper-spirituality to cover over his own sin. He used a holiness that wasn't genuine to cover over his own sin. And so many people are guilty of that. When they disagree with an idea, they'll point out the flaws, they'll point to some over-exaggeration of what should have been done, maybe to make themselves feel better in the long run. But verse 6 gives us the full picture. Judas was far from actually caring about poor people. He was merely a thief who wanted to line his own pockets, to be a blessing to himself. So if you have some critic who is offering up their objection to something that you are doing for the Lord with humility and with sincerity on your part, don't worry about the critics. Brush it off, shake it off, and you keep on blessing the Lord. Easier said than done, I know. Believe me, I know. But what I love about these verses is we see how God handles critics. Because Jesus intervenes on behalf of Mary pretty quickly. Verse 7, therefore Jesus said, hey, leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. Now what I love of what Jesus does here, he takes this act, this beautiful act, that Mary doesn't fully understand why she's doing it. She just is doing it to bless the Lord. But he's applying it to what will come. She's preparing me for my burial. This week is it. I'm going to die. And one day, Jesus will intervene for you. Satan, did you know, is your biggest critic. He wants to tear you down in ways that will embarrass you, that will bring shame to you and your family, that will destroy you. And on Judgment Day, Jesus is going to be your representative before God the Father, and He's going to tell Satan, hey, leave him alone. Hey, leave her alone. He will intervene for you and silence your greatest critic. And not only will He silence your critic, finally He will affirm your priorities. Look at verse 8. Jesus says it, "For you will always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me with you." What I love there is that a choice had to be made. And Judas offers the other choice. We can either take this perfume and we can lay it at the feet of Jesus and bless Him, or we can sell it and give the money to the poor. Both seem like pretty good ideas, but you've got to choose what you want to do. And in this moment, what Jesus is doing for Mary is saying she chose rightly. She chose correctly. She chose what was best. She could have chosen what was good, but she chose what was best. And in this moment, what Jesus is doing is He's affirming her priority, her choice that she made. You've got choices to make. We've all got choices to make. Choose the best. Well, what's the best? The best choice you can make is when you choose to bless the Lord. We're going to stand together, and I'm going to pray, and then we're going to have a time of decision. Will you stand with me? Let's pray.